I had to cover this in this speech today to pass along the information that I think is vital to an understanding of what is happening in the United States today. What I will be covering is not only important to the Christian, it is important to every man, woman, and child in the world for reasons that I will attempt to make clear as I proceed. It seems that Christianity is under attack everywhere in the world. And I will be attempting to show you that this is true because there are some people in this nation who want Christianity to be attacked. I am willing to know the whole truth and to provide for it. And we shall now embark on an 8-hour journey into the truth. Thank you, Doyle. I'm humbled by your invitation, and I sincerely want to thank you for inviting me. Whether you're going to say, why am I wearing a baseball cap? There's a very important reason you'll see in a minute. I was told it's going to be informal, so please keep that in mind. And we're going to talk about why our young people today are wearing their baseball caps backwards. You say, that's silly. It's not important. Yes, it is. It's very important. Of course, here's the way that baseball players should be wearing their cap, the visor in the front. And the reason there's a visor on the cap is to keep the sun out of their eyes as they play the game. And to prove that I'm right, please explain this picture to me. But there's a reason that they're doing this. I'm contending that it's because they're intentionally wearing it backwards because they're out to reject our modern day civilization. So please, if you will with me, consider as I do that picture to be dumb. And this is why women burned their bras back in the 60s. And here's some additional evidence. This is Karl Marx, the father of communism. Notice his hair. He was letting it grow long as a way of showing his civilization, the short-haired civilization, that he was rejecting it in favor of communism, a new civilization. And here's a picture of Albert Pike, perhaps the greatest Mason of all time, also letting his hair grow long as a way of showing his contempt for the civilization he was living in. And that is the first clue why people want to destroy Christianity. Because we're living in a new civilization called the New World Order. There it is. We're going there. And to do so, we've got to reject the old world order by replacing it with a new civilization. Now, with that out of the way, let me explain what I'll be covering as we discuss this today. First of all, I don't know what your level of understanding is in this group, although I know no doubt it's very high because you've been listening to Bill Cooper and his radio program for many years, so you know an awful lot. But I'd like you to know that, ask you to be patient with me when I discuss something that you already know. Grail told me they are making a DVD of this presentation today, and there will be, of course, some who know very little about this subject. That's why some of this stuff might be repetitious for you. This speech will be about 8 hours long and will be given between the hours of 8 and noon, and then we shall regather after lunch at 1 and hopefully end around 5. The 2 sessions are divided into 1-hour segments, and we will take a short recess, a total of 6 times during the speech. So please make the breaks as brief as you can. As I said, I don't know what your level of understanding is, but so a great deal of what we're going to discuss today will be new to some of you, and especially maybe even more to many of you. But I do know that much of what I'll be offering today is not known to you. So please bear with me when I'm discussing material you already know. I already said that. I had to cover this in this speech today to pass along the information that I think is vital to an understanding of what is happening in the United States today. So I'm asking you to understand that this speech overall might be the best 8-hour speech you've ever heard. I mean that sincerely. And that it'll make an enormous amount of sense. And with that, I'd like to get started. What I will be covering today is not only important to the Christian, it is important to every man, woman, and child in the world for reasons that I will attempt to make clear as I proceed. This subject will be, of course, of importance to every Christian, but it also means that it'll be important to every Buddhist, every Jew, every Muslim, and every atheist as well. As perhaps you know, a book by the author Dan Brown entitled The DaVinci Code was published in 2003 and has reportedly sold 60 million copies and has been made into apparently a very successful movie starring Tom Hanks. This book claims to be a work of fiction, but many who read it will certainly believe it is real and will therefore question the teachings of the Christian church. So the question is, why did Dan Brown write the book? And his book answers the question. He has his villain say this on page 235. Almost everything our fathers taught us about Christ is false. And he explains this on page 231. He has his villain say, the Bible is a product of man, not of God. And on page 256, he has the same villain say this. What good is a documented genealogy of Christ's bloodlines? Historians could not possibly confirm its authenticity. No more so, there it is. No more so than they can confirm the authenticity of the Bible. Let me take just a few minutes to explain just how wrong all of those statements are. This is a book entitled The Bible is History, written in 1956 by Werner Keller. The book claims that over 7.5 million copies have been sold when I bought the book back in the 60s. And it says the book is a confirmation of the book of books. And the subtitle is How Science Has Revealed the Astounding Truth Behind the Mysteries and Miracles of the Bible. So Dan Brown is categorically wrong. The premise of Dan Brown's book is that Christianity has been concealing a secret from the world, that Jesus married Mary Magdalene and produced a bloodline of people still on the earth today. And then on page 239, Dan Brown tells us about this secret. It is so powerful that if revealed, it threatens to devastate the very foundations of Christianity. And on page 267, the villain says, I will tell you what will happen if the documents get out. The Vatican, I believe he's meaning, of course, Christianity in the general sense, will face a crisis of faith unprecedented in its 2-millennium history. And then Dan Brown revealed the secret by publishing his book. That must mean he wished to devastate Christianity. But the question as to why Dan Brown released the secret has not been explained by anyone that I know of. So I shall try to answer that during this speech today. U.S. News and World Report did a series of articles on the book on May the 22nd, 2006, and they interviewed a Catholic priest in Forest Hills, Pennsylvania, who said ordinary believers were being deceived by the pseudo-history of that book. The fiction passed off as history undermines what Christianity is all about. They then quoted an American Catholic Monsignor as saying, in the short run, a number of people will be confused. The best way of countering the potential impact on Christian believers is to give good information to refute the bad. And I agree, and that's why I'm offering this speech today. I will be attempting to give good information to refute the bad. Mr. Brown did an interview on National Public Radio in 2003 and said that all of the characters and action are fictional. But, quote, the ancient history and the secret documents are all factual. And we shall examine that to see if he was telling the truth as we progress through this speech. Mr. Brown explains on page 389 and 390 that the secret has been concealed inside 3 secret societies. Volumes have been written about the ties between these secret societies. And those three societies are the Masons, the Knights Templar, and the PIERRE de Sion. But Dan Brown is not the only one writing books about the lineage of Jesus. This book, entitled Holy Blood, Holy Grail, was written in 1982 by these three authors, Henry Lincoln, Michael Baigent, and Richard Leigh. It appears as if this is primarily the source for the strange conclusions reached in Mr. Brown's book entitled The DaVinci Code. This book has been translated into more than 20 languages, so it too has had a dramatic effect on the thinking of the people of the world. Let me start by saying that these three writers have also made shocking statements like this one, taken from page 19 of their book. So far as the New Testament is concerned, there is nothing that can be definitely proved. It cannot even be proved that Jesus ever existed. I'd like to address that claim before I start with the others. This is a book entitled Evidence That Demands a Verdict, published by, written by Josh McDowell in 1972, who was a staff member of the Campus Crusade for Christ for 10 years when the book was written. The subtitle is Historical Evidences for the Christian Faith. And Bill Glass, a Christian evangelist, wrote this about the book: it is probably the finest reference book in the field of apologetics that has ever been written. I would like to discuss 7 non-biblical sources on the historicity of Jesus. The first is Tacitus, who wrote in 112 AD, but was born in 52 AD, shortly after Christ completed his ministry. He wrote, Christ was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. The second writer is Josephus, born in 37 AD, just after Christ was crucified, and he wrote this. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man. He was the Christ, and when Pilate condemned him on the cross, he appeared to them alive again the third day. These comments so far are completely in accord, of course, with the scriptures. The third source is Suetonius, a Roman historian who wrote in 120 AD. As the Jews were making constant disturbances at the instigation of Christ, Claudius and the Roman emperor expelled them from Rome. The fourth source is Pliny the Younger, wrote in 112 AD as governor of Bithynia in Asia Minor. He wrote to the Emperor Trajan. By the way, I'm pronouncing this the best I can. I don't know these words. They're strange to me, but so please bear with me. On how to treat the Christians. He, meaning Trajan, had made the Christians bow down to statues of Trajan, but that he also made them curse Christ, which a genuine Christian cannot be induced to do. The fifth source is Tertullian, a theologian in Carthage around 197 AD, who mentioned exchanges between Tiberius and Pontius Pilate. Tiberius, having received intelligence from the truth about Christ's divinity, brought the matter before the Roman Senate. The sixth source is Julius Africanus, who wrote about Jesus in 221 AD by writing that Thallus, an historian, had written about him in 52 AD and said this: the season of the full moon was when Christ died. And the last source is Justin Martyr, who wrote about Pontius Pilate's report in 150 AD. He said, after he was crucified, those who crucified him cast lots for his garments. And later, Justin Martyr addressed the life of Christ with this comment, that he had performed these miracles may be satisfied from the acts of Pontius Pilate. So here are 7 writers, all of whom lived close to the times of Jesus, saying he was real. And in fact, that Jesus did in some cases exactly what the Bible said he did. But apparently Dan Brown and the 3 writers of the book entitled Holy Blood, Holy Grail did not read Josh McDowell's book. And may I add my own research into the reality of Jesus Christ. the Shroud of Turin is real. It is the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ. Modern science has proven that man, even with all of today's technology, cannot duplicate the shroud. In other words, it is a miracle. It is not man-made. Science has proven that this is the actual face of Jesus Christ as revealed on the Shroud of Turin. And those reports that carbon dating proved that it was made sometime between 1290 and 1360 are false. And an actual fraud was perpetrated against the people of the world by fraudulent scientists and clerics. So if you want to know, see the evidence of what I just said, may I suggest that you watch my DVD entitled The Shroud of Turin, because I prove without a shadow of a doubt that the cloth is genuine. It's genuine. It's real. It is the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ. This is a book entitled Bloodline of the Holy Grail and subtitled The Hidden Lineage of Jesus Revealed, written by Lawrence Gardner. Mr. Gardner's credentials on page Roman numeral 2 state that he is a Knights Templar of St. Anthony, but it is not clear in his book if this order is the same as the Knights Templar he discusses in his book. Mr. Gardner has some additional things to devastate the Christian faith beyond what Mr. Brown wrote. He says that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene on September the 3rd, 30 AD, and was crucified on March the 20th, 33 AD. And on September the 13th, 33 AD, Mary gave birth to a daughter named Tamar, meaning palm tree in Hebrew. By the way, others have said his daughter's name, if she existed, was Sarah. And sometime in 37 AD, Jesus had a son also named Jesus. And in 44 AD, Jesus had another son, and he was named Joseph after his grandfather. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear, there's not one shred of biblical and historical evidence that any of these claims are true. So we are left with two options. We can either believe God, the eyewitness, or we can believe Dan Brown and Lawrence Gardner. And I want to make this clear as well. Ralph Epperson believes God because he was an eyewitness. So during this speech, we will examine these secret societies to show you the reason why Dan Brown wrote his book. I believe you will be just as alarmed at what Dan Brown is not telling us as you will be by what he is telling us. I want you to know that I believe that this series of messages will alter the way you view history. I would also like to explain that nothing you will be exposed to during this lecture or speech today will alter in any way your traditional views of Christianity. You will continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the living Son of God. And I also want you to know that the views I will be expressing in this series will be mine and mine alone. I have no staff, no foundation supporting me, and no researchers working for me or with me. I'm completely independent, and I prefer it that way. In other words, I am completely responsible for all that I will be discussing with you today. Now, I'd like to urge you to become members of a jury. And as jury members, you will be expected to be as neutral as you can, forgetting all previous understandings, and make your decision based upon the evidence that I will present. In other words, please be open. After the 8 hours of this speech has ended, you will be free to reach your decision. And by the way, when I quote scripture, I want you to know I'll be using the King James Version of the Bible. And by the way, I'm not here to preach. I'm here to, as an historian, to show you that the Bible is correct and that these people who write these books are intentionally out to devastate Christianity. I would now like to quote these historic words from Patrick Henry, one of our nation's great founding fathers, who said this about the truth back during the days prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, 1776. He spoke about the truth and why we should want to be exposed to it. March the 23rd, 1775. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to that siren till she transforms us into beasts. For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it might cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it. And some of the material I will be presenting will be, as Patrick Henry said, a painful truth. So this is Ralph Epperson, who said this on September the 18th, 2010, while I was preparing this speech. I am willing to know the whole truth and to provide for it. And we shall now embark on an 8-hour journey into the truth. So I'd like to ask you and then answer this question. Is there some connection? Is there some connection between Dan Brown's book and what is happening in America today? And I'm hopeful that I will be able to convince you during this speech that there is a connection. It seems that Christianity is under attack everywhere in the world. And I will be attempting to show you that this is true because there are some people in this nation who want Christianity to be attacked. Now let me get to the matter at hand. There is a very important reason why Dan Brown wrote his book. And I've been studying that reason way before Dan Brown finished writing that book. Let me go back now to Mr. Brown's book itself to read this comment. Volumes have been written about the ties between the Masons and the Knights Templar and the Priory Design. I think we've already seen that. Quote, let's read it again. I will be presenting the evidence that one of these secret societies is a complete fraud, but the other two are alive and well even today. Let me start with this. For centuries, writers have been writing about an object called the Holy Grail. This is not it, but a picture of what people think the Holy Grail might look like. And the reason no one knows what it looks like is because history has not revealed what the Holy Grail is. According to some traditions, it was the cup from which the disciples drank at the Last Supper. According to some other traditions, it was the cup in which Joseph of Arimathea caught Jesus' blood as he hung on the cross. Mr. Brown contends that the Holy Grail is the bloodline created by the birth of the daughter of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So let me start by examining one of these three secret societies that Mr. Brown wrote about. On the first pages inside his book, Mr. Brown makes this statement. The Priory of Sion, a European secret society founded in 1099, is a real organization. The Holy Blood book revealed how they first heard about the Priory. The French journal Officiel is a written government publication in which all groups and organizations in the country must declare themselves, and in the July 20th, 1956 issue, the information required of the Priory was listed for the first time. So this was apparently the first anyone had heard about this organization. It was claimed that the Priory was discovered by Pierre Plantard, who was the one who claimed that it was created in 1099. This is Josh Bernstein, an historian who recently did a documentary on the History Channel entitled The DaVinci Code Bloodline. He discovered these facts about the Priory de Sion. Mr. Plantard claimed that the Priory was created in 1099, but that he actually found it in 1956. He later filed those papers in the French National Library in 1967, so that these papers can still be viewed as the dossiers secrets, I guess. The Holy Blood book tells us that the objective of the Priory is the restoration of the Merovingian dynasty and bloodline which had ruled France between the 5th and 8th centuries. They wrote this. Although deposed in the 8th century, the Merovingian bloodline did not become extinct. The Priory was ruled by a Grand Master, and the Holy Blood book listed all 26 of them from its inception to the current day. The list included such notable individuals of the past as Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, Victor Hugo, Claude Debussy, and then Pierre Plantard claimed to be a direct descendant of the Merovingian kings. He predicted in the near future there would be a dramatic upheaval in France, a radical change in French institutions, which would pave the way for the reinstatement of the monarchy. So that means if the Merovingian line was placed upon a new throne of France as kings, guess who would become the new king? Pierre Plantard. You know, isn't that interesting? But in 1993, Mr. Plantard stated under oath they had made the entire thing up. So Mr. Brown's assertion that the Priory of Sion, a European secret society founded in 1099, is a real organization is patently false. He did not do his homework. Mr. Brown wrote his book in 2003, and it was 10 years after Pierre Plantard stated under oath that he made the entire thing up. But that's not all. Josh Bernstein wanted to test Mr. Brown's hypothesis that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married and produced a bloodline, and that their daughter married into the Merovingian bloodline. Josh went to the university in Belgium, a university, and met there to meet with one of Europe's most famous DNA experts, and found out that it would be possible to test Mr. Brown's hypothesis by doing some DNA tests. So we found the remains of Queen, I'll pronounce it the best I can, Arnegund, a Merovingian queen who died in 561 AD in a French museum. This is a ring that was buried with her bones, and it was used to document that the remains were hers. He was able to obtain some bones and a tooth from those remains for a test. And then he found a Christian ministry, a Christian monastery and church in Israel whose members spoke Aramaic, the language that Mary Magdalene spoke while she was alive. He interviewed the archbishop of this church, and when Josh asked him to assist him in getting some DNA from some of his parishioners, the archbishop arranged it, and Josh obtained DNA from a man and his son. Josh then took the bone samples and the DNA from the two church members back to Belgium and gave them to the DNA tester. Josh returned sometime later and got the results from the doctor. There was no Middle Eastern DNA strains in the DNA taken from Queen Arnegund. And if she had DNA from the bloodline of Jesus, those strains would have shown up. Therefore, modern DNA tests prove that Jesus did not father a child who had married into the Merovingian bloodline. At the end of the program, Mr. Bernstein said, the DaVinci Code is a very clever interweaving of fantasies and legends that have evolved over the last 2,000 years. His book is more fiction than fact. So Mr. Brown's statement that the Priory of Sion is real is an enormous lie. His statement that Jesus married and produced a female child is an enormous lie. The DaVinci Code book says that the Priory of Sion created a military arm called the Knights Templar. The Holy Blood book tells its readers just how important the Knights Templar are. At their zenith, they were the most powerful and influential organization in the whole of Christendom, with the possible exception of the papacy. So the Knights Templar were founded in the early 12th century, and these three authors of the Holy Blood book tell us, one day in 1118, the founders of the Knights Templar presented himself, the founder, one man, presented himself with 8 comrades at the palace of the King of Jerusalem with a stated objective. They should keep the roads, I think I've gone one too far. No, that's okay. Keep the roads and highways safe in Jerusalem for the protection of the pilgrims visiting that city. No one seems to question how 8 men, even as valiant as these men were supposed to be, could keep the roads safe in a city the size of Jerusalem, but guess who wonders how that happened? The king agreed, and the Knights Templar started to perform that function. However, the 3 authors of the Holy Blood Holy Grail book, wrote this about that offer and acceptance. There is no record anywhere, not even later, of them doing anything to protect pilgrims. So the Templars must have had another mission. But according to page 212 of the book by Lawrence Gardner, they did. Quote, deep beneath the Temple of Solomon was the great stable complex of King Solomon. To open up this room was the secret mission of the Knights Templar, for it was known to contain the wealth of Old Testament Jerusalem. So someone knew that the Jewish people had left a fortune underneath the original Temple of Solomon. None of the writers I've read have written how the Knights Templar learned of this treasure, but somehow they found out about it. One of the clues surfaced in or around 1947, when thousands of fragments of the biblical and early Jewish documents were discovered in 11 caves near the Qumran on the shores of the Dead Sea. They're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of those scrolls is called the Copper Scroll because it was written on copper and makes explicit references to great quantities of bullion, sacred vessels, and treasure of an undetermined kind left underneath the Temple of Solomon. So it seems to be that someone found out about it and then developed a phony excuse to be there and dig into the ground underneath the temple. And on page 215, Mr. Gardner tells us when it was found. By 1127, the Templar search was over. They had retrieved an untold wealth of gold bullion and hidden treasure. And they say that it was in 1127 that the Templars returned to Europe. So all three of these books claim that the Templars were the group who founded international banking. Okay? Isn't that interesting? I would like to spend a few minutes explaining what an international banker is if this is new to you. Your local bank makes loans to individuals and corporations. An international bank loans money to governments to finance their national debt. And just like your local bank charges interest when you borrow money, the international bankers charge nations interest on the money they lend to them. So these authors were claiming that the Knights Templar founded the international banking fraternity. And the authors of the Holy Blood book tell us just how extended their involvement was. He said they became the bankers for every throne in Europe. Perhaps the greatest warning I can give you about the dangers of international bankers was voiced by two of our founding fathers. First was Thomas Jefferson, America's third president, who warned us, it is incumbent, I'm sorry, I went too fast, incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes. Now we're current, a principle which acted on would save 1/2 of the wars of the world. Do you understand? The reason we have wars is to finance the war by borrowing from international bankers. What he was saying was that bankers love wars because they are expensive and governments borrow money from international bankers to pay for them. The bankers then loan both nations the money to fight it and then charge both of them interest. And according to Jefferson, if we didn't have international bankers, we wouldn't have 1/2 of these wars. This thought was echoed by Benjamin Franklin, who told us why we should not borrow money. The borrower is the slave to the lender. And this is why Epperson agrees with Jefferson and Franklin. Now, when you loan money to the government, you make certain that the king pays you back, not only the principal, but on the interest as well. And the way you make certain the king pays you is you let him know you have financed the nation on his borders, and that if he does not pay, he, the banker, will encourage the king and the neighboring nation to declare war on the first nation. And then the banker will collect the money he has owed himself after the first king is deposed. This threat makes the first king a little nervous because he knows that the banker is telling him the truth. So this makes this makes the banker the real king of both nations. And to illustrate this power, The authors of the Holy Blood book wrote this story. In 1252, Henry III of England, who lived from 1216 to 1272, dared to challenge them, threatening to confiscate certain of their domains. He said, "You Templars have so many possessions that you rave with pride and haughtiness." And the master of the Knights Templar replied, "What sayest thou, O king? So long as thou dost exercise justice," meaning in my words, as long as you pay your debts, "thou will reign. But if thou infringe it, thou wilt cease to be king." This is arrogant power, threatening the king when he could command armies to suppress the Knights Templar. But they could because they could finance the king of a neighboring nation. Tony Robinson did a 2-hour documentary on the Discovery Channel entitled The Real DaVinci Code, and he did an excellent job of researching the claims of Dan Brown. He showed a clip of Mr. Brown in a televised interview saying this about his book: "All of the art, architecture, secret rituals, and secret societies are historical fact." And after Mr. Robinson examined what Mr. Brown wrote, he drew these conclusions: the book is rubbish and a big guess. Mr. Robinson then interviewed Michael Baigent, one of the 3 authors of the Holy Blood book. He asked him about whether Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a child, and Baigent said, "There is no evidence there is a child." And then he asked him if this story about there being a marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and Baigent said, "Is it true? I don't know." But he wrote his book anyway. So these documentaries completely destroyed the facts presented in Dan Brown's book. However, as I said, the Knights Templar and the Masons are real. So I would agree with Mr. Brown on that truth. Mr. Brown wrote that by the 1300s, the Knights Templar had amassed an enormous wealth and started challenging the Catholic Church. And then on page 217, Mr. Gardner implies that one of the customers of these international bankers was the Catholic Church itself, who borrowed money to build those magnificent, beautiful Gothic cathedrals all over Europe. Many of these cathedrals were started in the 12th century, meaning shortly after the Knights Templar brought the fortune back from Jerusalem. So this, according to these 2 writers, the money borrowed from the Knights Templar was used to build these cathedrals all over the world. And it is they who became the international bankers of the world. So the second of the secret societies mentioned by Dan Brown, the Knights Templar, is real. And as we shall soon see, so are the third, the Masons. And they are the reasons we must examine both of these in some detail, because they are major, and I mean major, players in the history of this world. So now let's talk about the Masons. This is a very interesting book entitled Born in Blood, written by John Robinson and published in 1989. The book provides the evidence that the Knights Templar are the father to the Masonic Lodge. And I will first expose the link between the Knights and the Masonic Lodge. He confirms that the Knights Templar were formed in 1118 in Jerusalem in the aftermath of the First Crusade. The Knights came under criticism in 1307 and on Friday the 13th of October, orders issued by King Philip IV were sent out to arrest as many of the Templars as possible. On November 22nd, 1307, notice the date, please, November the 22nd. We'll find a connection to that as well later on. November the 22nd, 1307, Pope Clement V issued the papal bull entitled Pastoralis Preeminente, stating that the charges against the Templars appeared to be true. The Knights were arrested and imprisoned, or many of them, I should say, and on March the 14th, 1314, Jacque de Molay, the Grand Master, meaning the president of the Knights Templar, was burned at the stake in front of the great Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, France. And on page 224, Mr. Gardner provides us with a possible motive for this burning. King Philip IV owed a great deal of money to the Knights and was practically bankrupt. With papal support, King Philippe persecuted the Templars in France and endeavored to eliminate the order in other countries. He wanted to gain control of the wealth of the Knights Templar to eliminate the heavy debt he owed them. And the king did not achieve his primary objective, for the treasure remained beyond his grasp. A majority of the treasure was hidden away in the treasury vaults of Paris. Knowing that the Pope was a pawn of King Philippe, de Molay arranged for the Paris treasure to be removed. In the fleet of 18 ships, most of which sailed to Scotland. Mr. Robinson, on page 165 of his book, supports the statement made by Mr. Gardner that the Knights Templar had 18 ships, but he adds another intriguing piece of history. The ships provided the means to make a living. The ships were ideally suited for piracy. Could it be that all of those pirates in the past were in truth members of the Knights Templar? Is it possible that Errol Flynn and all of the other actors who portrayed pirates were in fact portraying members of the Knights Templar? I think so. And that is why there were so many movies made about their exploits. Mr. Robinson amplified his statements by connecting the pirates to the Masonic Lodge on page 17 of his book, entitled Born in Blood. A Master Mason, meaning a third-degree Mason, is told in his initiation rites that this degree will make him a brother to pirates. He'll become a brother to pirates. So the Masons acknowledge the pirates as being Knights Templars as well. Mr. Robinson then provides the readers with the story proving this. In 1813, a Freemason was captain of a merchant ship that was taken by a pirate. In desperation, the captain gave the grand hailing sign. I will explain what this sign is in more detail in a few minutes, but just for now, I will say that it is a sign that one Mason gives to another Mason to know that he's one of the brothers. The sign was recognized by the pirate chief, who returned the Masonic captain's goods and sent him on his way. Please remember this story. It is our first clue that Masons protect their fellow Masons no matter what the cost. It will play an important part in our story a little later. Now let's go back to the Knights Templar. As we just learned, the ship sailed to Scotland, and it was in Scotland that the Knights Templar gave birth to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. It is an interesting question as to why the Knights Templar felt they could escape the punishment of many of the kings in Europe who were arresting their members. The three authors of the Holy Blood Book tell us the papal bulls dissolving the order were never proclaimed in Scotland. So many English and French Templars found a Scottish refuge, and that fact will play an important role in what we shall soon cover. Legend says that as de Molay was being burned at the stake, he called down a curse on Philippe and upon his family for 13 generations. He then called upon both the king and the Pope to meet him within the year for the judgment at the throne of God. Clement V died in the following month of April, followed by Philip's unexplained death in November of that same year. The Holy Blood Book gives the readers some clue that it was the Knights Templars that fulfilled the prophecy made by their leaders. They wrote this, look at this. There is no need to look for supernatural explanations. The Templars possessed great expertise in the use of poisons. So maybe the Templars were obeying a direct command of their soon-to-be martyred leader, and that is why these two men met with de Molay in death. This is a book entitled Paolo VI, the book about Pope Paul VI, who was the Catholic Pope from 1963 to 1978. This book was published in Italy in 1998 and was sent to me about a year ago by a Catholic priest who had a working knowledge of Latin but not of Italian. The book appears to claim that this Pope was a member of the Masons, and the priest could not confirm that because his knowledge of the Italian language is not adequate. Now, this is a color drawing of a three-tiered crown, apparently symbolic of the dominion of the Catholic Church over heaven, earth, and the spiritual world. I presume the keys are symbols of the keys of heaven, believed to be given to Peter and the Catholic Church by Jesus. This is a drawing of Pope Gregory the Great wearing the three-tiered crown, so it is a crown worn by popes. And remember this as well for reasons we'll see a little later. But there's one very interesting, puzzling picture and caption in this book. This picture shows the Pope carrying a three-tiered crown to the tomb of Jacque de Molay. This is a very strange event in the history of the Catholic Church, since it was the Catholic Church that burned de Molay at the stake in 1314. So it appears as if the Pope was providing de Molay with recognition of his power. As I said, this is a very strange photograph. Now let me return to the Masons and the Knights Templars. From the 1300s on, however, there is little to connect the Knights Templars with the Masons. But it is known that the Masons had existed for hundreds of years before the official date of their founding on June the 24th, 1717. This is the date when the Masons claim organized Freemasonry started, when 4 Masonic lodges joined together to form the Grand Lodge of England. John Robinson was not a Mason when he wrote the book entitled Born in Blood, but later became a 33rd degree Mason. We'll talk about these things, of course, in detail a little later. And that's, of course, the highest degree attainable. And this is how he connects the Knights Templar and the Freemasons. The Knights Templar formed a secret society of mutual protection that came to be called Freemasonry. And the main body in the United States is called the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. But it is certainly conceivable that these men could have formed the Scottish Rite. Now let me show you a little about the Masons. First of all, it is vital, in my opinion, that we learn all we can about the Masons. The author of the Holy Blood book told us on page 22, Freemasonry is of vital importance to any history of 18th century Europe. Is that what, I missed the last word. Europe. As well as to the founding of the United States by the Masons. But fewest history books even mention it. I would say that most Americans know little or nothing about this group, yet historians are saying we should know all about them. And as we continue our study of the Masons, I am hopeful that you will see the reasons we know so little about this organization. Now, let me provide you with some evidence that Dan Brown is a member of the Masonic Lodge. And once you understand that, what I will be presenting in the remainder of this speech will make enormous sense, because it is my contention that the evidence about the Masons proves that it is not an organization anyone would want to belong to. Now, this is my copy of the DaVinci Code book. The publishers printed 4 different versions. One was the regular paperback, the trade paperback like the one I bought, the glossy tabletop version with pictures of the pertinent locations and paintings discussed in the book, and then the hardbound cover. The hardbound cover had a dust cover on it, and the publishers printed 4 paragraphs on the 2 inside portions, 2 on either end. Now this is a color copy of those 2 flaps made by a friend of mine who purchased the hardbound copy and then scanned it and sent it to me. And this is a close-up of the first paragraph. Now, I know you might not be able to see that, but if you look very carefully, you'll notice that certain letters are in bold, and my friend is the one that put the little check mark above it. And these letters in those paragraphs are I-S-T-H-E-R and then the letter E. And these are the letters in all 4 paragraphs, I-S-T-H, etc. And they spell out, is there no help for the widow's son? This is a book written by a Mason entitled Freemasonry Exposed, written in 1826 by Captain William Morgan. Captain Morgan had been a Mason for something like 30 years when he published his book. We will be covering this book pretty thoroughly a little later today for a very important reason. But for now, I would like to show you just one page of it because it will explain what these words mean. This is part of page 76 of Captain Morgan's book, and you will see these words and the drawing in their context. You will notice that these exact words are, is there no help for the widow's son? And highlighted in yellow and red, and are called, as you can see on the left, the grand hailing sign. You will also notice that the paragraph on the right explains how the sign is to be given, and you will see a drawing of the grand healing sign being shown. The Masons are taught that these words and the accompanying sign are to be listed to identify yourself to another Mason when you are in distress. And if the person who sees the sign and or hears the words is a Mason, he will come to the first person's rescue. It appears as if Dan Brown is using these letters as a way of identifying himself as a Mason to any Mason reading the book. But only a small percentage of the people who read the book will first of all notice the bold letters and then find all of them in the 4 paragraphs. Then they would have to know what the words mean. And if they did, they would recognize Dan Brown as being a fellow Mason. And so that is one of the reasons I believe Dan Brown had those letters printed in bold font. I think it is his way, or at least the publisher's way, of letting the Masonic members know that Dan Brown was a Mason. And when I show you what these Masons believe, I think you will see why he wrote these words and this book for the benefit of the Masonic Lodge. Since I'm talking about the Mason's Grand Healing Sign, I would like to talk about an actual case when the words were spoken in an attempt to not have the gunman shoot the Mason mouthing the words. This is Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church. Mr. Smith was born in 1806 and founded the church in 1830. On March the 16th, 1842, Mr. Smith became a Master Mason in the Masonic Lodge in Nauvoo, Illinois, which means that he completed the 3rd degree. On May the 4th, 1842, about 2 months later, Mr. Smith released the endowment ceremony, the, quote, sacred but not secret temple ceremony, end quote. Bruce McConkie, one of the apostles of the Mormon Church, said this in 1966. The ordinances performed in the temple were given to the prophet Joseph Smith by revelation. Dr. Reed Dunham, president of the Mormon History Association, has disagreed with that statement. By the way, this last man is a Mormon as well. There is absolutely no question that the Mormon ceremony had an immediate inspiration from Masonry. And on June the 27th, 1844, Joseph Smith was shot to death in the jail in Carthage, Illinois. Apparently, Mr. Smith recognized the shooters as being his fellow Masons. And knowing that they were there to kill him, he started to say the grand hailing sign, expecting to gain the protection its members are pledged to give a brother in distress. It was reported in the Mormon publication called Times and Seasons that he only got part of it out, saying, "O Lord my God," which is the first part of that statement, before he was shot down. However, John Leigh, a key Mormon during the time, reported that Mr. Smith said the entire phrase, "O Lord my God, is there no help for the widow's son?" But in any case, the Masons continued shooting until Smith was dead. Now the question is, why would the Masons shoot their fellow Mason once he gave the grand hailing sign, identifying himself as a brother? And the only answer that makes sense is that the Masons knew that the endowment ceremony revealed Masonic secrets, and that Mr. Smith had taken an oath not to reveal any Masonic secrets when he joined the lodge. So in this case, the grand hailing sign did not protect him. But if he revealed Masonic secrets in violation of his own oath, the Masons knew that he could suffer a death penalty for having done so. Apparently, Mr. Smith did not connect the shooting with the fact that he revealed Masonic secrets in the endowment ceremony. Now that's the end of this section.